going to talk about Israel's nation-state law. So obviously it's Christmas 2018, and I thought this would be a great gift to the world, talking about this. I get this out of Friends of Israel magazine, November 2018 edition. Israel My Glory, it's called, the actual magazine. So, and don't let this be your last issue. I get another. I gotta renew, I guess. Alright. So, I thought this was really interesting because Israel has the right idea here about putting the sort of ideas about what they want the nation to, who they want the nation to be comprised of, and they're putting it in writing. And that's I've said that, my idea is that, Americans should go back to the drawing board and decide how we're going to split up the United States into these different groups, and each one should be put in writing as to who's going to live there and what the laws are going to be. Is it going to be a theocracy or a democracy or whatever? Now, I mean, right now in America we have a humanist, a Freemason humanist theocracy, and we're part of the the global New World Order. I mean, I think that here's a little illustration. Here's globalism. Globalism's up here, and here's the path of America, going straight to globalism. And we have sort of a left wing here and a right wing, and they're both going there. Oh, now you also have an alt-right. Now the alt-right wants to do is, I think, the alt-right's going to want to do that, make a U-turn and go away from globalism. But as long as you're in the system, that's this arrow here, that's the neocons and so forth, and, that's where America is going. It doesn't matter who's the president, as long as you got the Council on Foreign Relations and the Federal Reserve and people like Henry Kissinger, then there's only one direction the United States is going to go, and that's towards globalism. Now, if the alt-right, I think the alt-right should secede, should be pushing for secession. David Duke thinks, and a lot of other people think, we should, take the whole country and work with the whole country at once like that. I don't think that that's a good idea. I think the more little nation states you can get out of it, the harder it's going to be for centralists to control it. There's a reason we can't take the whole country like that. Besides, I'm not really, I'm not like a, alt-right. There's a spectrum of alt-right, and I don't even know if I necessarily fall in that spectrum, but I'm a Christian secessionist, so I would like to see Christians secede from the United States and go back to the time when they first settled America, before it became a union of states. Now, obviously, something happened where the people who came here for religious freedom lost that priority and were willing to, sign up on something that was, supposed to be neutral. There's no such thing as neutral, but they, I think, gave away their ability to self-governance when they joined the Union, but they began to lose the idea of prioritizing a theocracy. Let's put it that way, because that's really what some of those early colonies were like, theocracies. And to me, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not a bad word. That's a good word. Why shouldn't your nation be ruled by God? Why shouldn't your nation be ruled by Jesus? I mean, that's, I think, the best scenario. Now, of course, the rhetoric against that is that, you have these things where people are forced to adopt a belief system that they don't believe in. Well, that's what's happening to me now as a Christian in America. But the way I'm talking about things is that it'd be done voluntarily. So everything be done on a voluntary basis, so that if you're part of this Christian nation and you didn't want to be part of it, you could go somewhere else. And there'll be plenty of other, I'd imagine there'll be plenty of other options, plenty of other places you could go. But the way the New World Order is going, there's not going to be anywhere else to go. Even Prager University is now, I saw recently one of their infomercials promoting this idea of nation states and sovereign nations and against globalism and so forth. So let's get into this article here. It says the Knesset recently enacted new law that declares Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people and that they have an exclusive right to national self-determination in it. The so-called nation-state law establishes Hebrew as the official language of Israel and declares Jerusalem the country's official capital. It also asserts that the development of Jewish settlements is a national interest that will be encouraged, promoted, and consolidated. So I think that's an excellent idea for them to sit down and write their intentions, and that's what I would do as a Christian secessionist. And I think that's what all these nations should do before it's too late. Sweden, France, Germany, they should put it in writing that this is a nation for these people, and that other people that want to live there are going to be, living there as visitors. They're going to understand that they're living in a nation, for instance, that's comprised of a particular people. And maybe, my preference is a particular belief system, Christianity. But you see the way America is set up now, and what we're trying to do with open societies and so forth, is really the unstated reality is that these nations are, like the United States, are humanist theocracies, if you want to call it that, because whoever you obey is your God, so to speak. Whoever you put in charge is your God. America's humanists are in charge. They even tell Christians that you can't allow your beliefs to address lawmaking process. So why are we paying taxes? See, I guess that would be sort of like in this Jewish situation. You would be telling Israel that Israelis, people who consider themselves Jewish, should not have a voice in the Israeli government. That's what that's like in America. That's what it would be. That would be the equivalent. So somehow Israel always seems to find itself in the middle of a controversy. Israel's parliament recently passed a bill called Jewish Nation State Law, and immediately made headlines around the world. American news and opinion website Vox posted this headline online: Israel's hugely controversial nation-state law explained. ABC News headline read: Israel passes controversial Jewish nation-state law. NBC News wrote: Israel nation-state law prompts criticism around the world, including from U.S. Jewish groups. The Time magazine wrote: Israel nation-state law is an affront to democracy. And yeah, the Jewish population is really split on this, because they know that if Israel is allowed to define itself as an ethnic state, then, to be fair, so should the rest of the world be free to do that. And they should be free to do that, by the way. And so many liberal Jewish people don't like that idea, and they want no nation states, and they want open societies and so forth. And because they realize that if Israel is going to be defined like that, then they have to allow other nations to define themselves like that, and that could mean less influence for Jewish people in those other nations. And I personally believe that if you have a non-Jewish nation, then you should not have Jews in the government. That's my own personal belief. That way, the people who define the nation can govern themselves without that influence, unless you want to say that America is a Jewish nation. Obama said we were a Muslim nation. You could say that that most of Europe is also part of the Jewish. They are also Jewish nations, so long as there's Jewish people who control their government, and something like the EU is following those ideas of people like George Soros and other people who consider themselves Jewish. Now, this is interesting because the alt-right often conflates Israel and Zionism with open societies and as enemies to this idea of ethno-states. But the thing is, that's not true. The Zionists who... Now, of course, there's this double standard. Now, the Zionists who want Israel to be an ethno-state, some of them also are okay with others being ethno-states. And even if it means to the exclusion of the Jews who are ruling the world now, if they were to get expelled from different places, they would have Israel to go to. This is Benjamin Netanyahu's interest. He actually wants all Jewish people to live in Israel, and so it would be in his interest if other nations became ethno-states or religious states or something like that, where Jews were excluded from the government. I think that really, technically, the United States should be considered a Jewish nation because they're the Jews have the most power and influence and control. And so I think we should at least be honest about that. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's another issue. It's just that it's a true thing. It's the truth. That's the truth of the matter. That's United States, and we're sort of like a satellite, a nation, an Israeli satellite nation or colony, and that's because the way the way the United States was interpreted, it never was. United States never did have one of these statements. They never had a nation-state law that addressed, who's going to live here and what their beliefs are going to be. Basically, it is a system that says, technically, what basically says whoever can wield the most influence controls the country. That's how America was set up. With George Washington and the founding F-tards, that was their work. That whoever, and this. Okay, so I'll read some more of this. The purpose of the new law is to enshrine Israel as a Jewish state. If you didn't know any better, you might think this law is absolutely scandalous. But what's so controversial about calling Israel a Jewish state? Israel was designed to be a Jewish state. See, and that's what I'm saying. America's too big to begin with, but the original colonies, they should have designed themselves to be the particular either ethnic group or religious group that they wanted to maintain as the rulers of that colony or that piece of land or whatever. That should have been stated, and it never should have been tampered with. So the Jews are. There's a reason they're so smart. I mean, this is more evidence. Why wouldn't you do this? Why wouldn't everybody do this? It just makes absolute common sense. Okay, Article 2 of the League of Nations mandate for Palestine, a legal document, took effect in 1923 and made Great Britain the ruling power of Palestine, declared mandatory shall be responsible for placing the country under such political, administrative, and economic conditions as will secure the establishment of the Jewish nation home, a Jewish national home. They said the Jewish nation state law solidifies basic national claims for all Jewish citizens, including Arab Israelis. It states that Israel is the historic homeland of the Jewish people, and Jewish people have a right to self-determination. Israel remain the country's name, and Hatikvah, the hope, will remain Israel's national anthem. Hebrew is a national language. And then it says, but Arabic maintains a special status among the many languages spoken in the country. Finally, the state flag is white with two blue stripes near the edges and a blue Star of David in the center. The law merely states the obvious: Israel is a Jewish democracy. Well, I think that's great, and I think that the Germans should do the same thing. The Germans should declare German as a German democracy for the German people, and the Swedes could do the same thing, and the French and so forth. Everybody should do this, and whether you want to do it on ethnic purposes or religious purposes, I would rather do it for as a Christian, as a Christian state to be established. And if you want to break that down further, I mean, there are some people that would be okay with, and there's nothing in the Bible to prevent this. If you wanted to have, say, a white Christian state and a black Christian state or something like that, there's nothing in the Bible that would prevent you from doing that. The idea in Christianity about inclusiveness is that no matter what your race or nationality is, if you believe in Jesus, you are equal in that respect in God's eyes, and the value you have in the kingdom of God. But that's not, it doesn't erase national identity. There's a passage that everybody likes to quote in the Bible about in Christ, and you got to remember it's in Christ only. It's not a generalization for all mankind. But if you're a Christian, there's no Jew nor Greek. There's no slave or free, and there's no male or female. Well, that's just saying in Christ the value of these different identities is not different. They're all valued equally as children of God who have eternal life. It's not saying that Greeks and Jews don't exist, or that free and slave don't exist, or that male and female don't exist. It's obviously not saying that. Otherwise, the Christians would all, practice bisexuality or something like this. We know that that's not what that scripture is trying to communicate, and likewise is not communicating that there's no such thing as nations or national identity. Okay, so the Jewish nation-state law was created to preserve Israel's Jewish identity amid growing anti-Israeli rhetoric that seeks to erode the country of its Jewishness. And this is one of the things I don't like about the alt-right. We're always complaining about the Jews having an ethnic, that you should be celebrating the fact that they have an ethnic state and a religious state, and you should want the same for yourself. You should be demanding the same for yourself. But when you try to tell Israel that they have to be an open society, and you're saying open society is the correct model for everybody, and you're shooting yourself in the foot, and the alt-right should never complain about Israel being an ethnic state. They should celebrate that fact, and they should imitate them by starting their own ethnic state or religious state. Okay. The dissent comes from Israel's progressive left and anti-Israel Arab citizens. For them, Israel's Jewish. This hinders non-Jews from feeling fully connected to Israel's society. Yosef Jabarin, an Arab-Israeli member of Israel's Knesset, believes the new law encourages hatred against Arabs and enables exclusion. But Mr. Jabarin is a living testimony that the opposite is true. He is one of many Arab-Israeli politicians who have equal voices in Israel's democracy. Israel's law offers equal voting rights to all citizens as one of the few countries in the Middle East that permit Arab women to vote. Well, this is a token. It's a tokenistic rhetoric to make it sound like this. There's actually something there. It's like saying Christians are allowed to vote in America. Well, you can't. Christians are not allowed to have laws based on their belief system. They put this kind of rhetoric in here to make it sound like they're actually there's actually more going on here than reality. The reality is that Arabs cannot turn Israel into a Muslim nation, for instance. You know what I mean? And so why bother putting this rhetoric in here? It's meaningless. It doesn't. It's not useful. It just makes it's wishy-washy, and it causes cognitive dissonance. Who cares if an Arab-Israeli politician doesn't have equal voice in Israeli democracy? If they want Israel to become a Muslim nation, they're not allowed to do that. And so why even bother with this nonsense about having an equal voice? It's not, it doesn't help anything. Just say, okay, they should state it like that. Although there are Arab Israelis in politics, they cannot turn Israel into a Muslim country or a non-Jewish nation. That's what needs to be said. It's misleading when people talk about this kind of thing where the Arab women have right to vote. So who cares? Doesn't mean anything. To me, the important thing is that Israel remain Jewish, and it is their law, and that's the way it's going to be, and that's all there is to it. And the Arab women that get the vote and so forth, they need to understand that they can only vote in the parameters that maintain a Jewish identity for Israel. That's what needs to be said. This, when people put this kind of patronizing, like we're really open kind of nonsense in there, the same thing happens to America about, we got this freedom of religion. Well, Christians aren't free to turn America into a Christian nation. The way America should talk about your voting rights is to say, you are allowed to vote for anything and anybody that continues America and a humanistic, Freemasonic, paradigm, and that's what needs to be spoken. Let's tell the truth here. That's this. I hate this when people talk about you get the government you want, and you whatever. It's the government you want is the one you get. No, it's not true. They're already defined. The United States is already defined as being humanist and Freemasonic. And that's the only thing you can vote for, and the only laws you can make, and it's the only direction the country can take. Unless you go back to the drawing board, and like I do, and start and split it up and start something, let people start something new. A lot of new things. And so, I'm just saying that it just bothers me when people try to, use this cognitive dissonance. Oh no, but they're really free. No, they're not. And they shouldn't be. I'm not arguing that Arabs should have the freedom to turn Israel to anything other than a Jewish state. I'm just saying you shouldn't be talking about them as having, to try to lead people to think that they have that kind of freedom. It's not theirs. This kind of, it really. You shouldn't even be talking about it. The only thing you should say about Arab Israelis is they have the right to vote for any policies or any people that are going to maintain Israel as a Jewish nation. That's the only thing they need to know. This other stuff is irritating and frustrating and annoying. Don't tell people they're free to, when they're not really free. Just tell them what freedoms they don't have. That's the important thing. And and Arab Israelis should know that that's what they're living in. They're living in a Jewish state. They have to respect that, and they have to accept it and say, okay, well, if I want to be in a Muslim state, there's places they can move. The Jewish democracy Israel's want to protect elects Arab Israelis to Israel's Supreme Court and encourages Arab citizens to get degrees in Israeli universities and invest Israeli money in building technology parks in Arab towns to help close the income gap between Arab and Jewish communities. Israel's democracy seems to provide more opportunities for minorities than Syria, Jordan, Iraq give minorities and their own people. Well, I still think that there's, it's the same kind of rhetoric that, to me it's not really meaningful. What they should say is, okay, here's what the Jews in Israel say. Okay, here's the kind of nation we want. This is what it's going to look like. If you're Arab and you don't like it, you should move. That's instead of this nonsense about that they have influence. Okay. Israel's founder dreamed of a state that would be a safe haven for Jewish people, where they'd no longer be persecuted for being Jewish and could enjoy the same rights as non-Jews. That's why the Declaration of Independence established Israel as a Jewish state, while still providing the same rights and privileges to citizens irrespective of religion, race, or sex. So here they go again. They keep laying this on, instead of saying, look, if you're there, and you're not Jewish, you got to understand you're living as a non-Jew in a Jewish nation, and get used to it or go somewhere else. See, and it goes on, the Declaration guarantees freedom of religious, conscience, language, education, which it can't do, because if you're an Arab Muslim, then freedom of religion means to promote ideas and activity that would turn Israel into a Muslim nation. That's part of the religious practice. And so they should, oh man, the Jewish nation state law is not an impediment to democracy. Protects what makes Israel most open society in the Middle East. So why do this? I hate that when people do this. They try to make it sound like, that they're really open to. I mean, could United States, for instance, if United States is really freedom and democracy and so forth, that means whoever has the most influence can. I mean, we could turn America into a Christian nation if we wanted. That's the way these things are worded. The Muslims could turn America into a Muslim nation if they wanted to. That's the way it's worded. That's the way they want you to believe that what could happen. I mean, if that was true, if freedom of religion was really, really available, then that's what it would mean. Well, just like what's going on here with this article, I think the people that own America, whoever they are, should be more honest about the limitations of what you can and cannot do in terms of changing the nation, altering the nation, turning into something. There's only one thing that happens, is the people who are in charge have an idea where the nation's going, and there's nothing you can do. You can just pretend, or you can fool yourself into thinking that things can be turned around or changed. But they already decided at the establishment of the nation where it's going. Benjamin Franklin used to talk about this. He envisioned a global government based on science, so that you would have a scientocracy instead of theocracy, and it's a global scientocracy. And if you don't go along with it, then you're anti-science. And that's really kind of what America is, where it's going. The people who really own and control the United States, and it's not the average voter. The average voter really has no voice whatsoever in terms of where the nation's actually going to go. We can just pretend, and it's fun pretending that you're free. Okay. If controversy is what you're looking for, look north Israel, where more than 500,000 Syrians have been murdered in a civil war. Look southwest, where Christians in Egypt suffer unprecedented persecution from Islamic extremists. Look east Jordan's impending economic ruin. Look to the Sudan and its Darfur genocide. But don't look to Israel, where Jewish democracy makes the Jewish state the freest society in the Middle East. Well, Jews and United States, Israel's and United States are the ones that made those other conditions so terrible in those other places. So that's not very nice. Proponents of the law say necessary to guarantee Israel's future as a Jewish country. It now enshrines Israel's Jewish identity into the basic laws, which serve as Israel's de facto constitution. Previously, Israel's Jewish identity was embodied only in its 1948 Declaration of Independence, which has no constitutional value. See, I love that. I think these guys, if other people were as smart as the Jews, they would do the same thing. And if they don't do the same thing, that means they're not as smart as the Jews. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed the nation-state law as pivotal moment in the annals of Zionism and the history of Israel. And that's great. And the thing is, the Jews should stop doing things like 9/11 and starting world wars and destroying other people. Why can't you be strong and let other people be strong also? See, that's what I don't like. Now, and that's not Zionism. That's just evil. To me, Zionism means that you believe Israel should be a Jewish state, and it ends there. And there's nothing in the Bible that ever told the Jews to rule anywhere else but Israel. They've never been. That land is where they're supposed to stay. That's what, in terms of running governments, they're not supposed to be in other people's governments. Okay. We enshrined the law and the basic principle of our existence. Israel is a nation state of Jewish people, which respects individual rights of all its citizens. That needs to be qualified. They shouldn't. Why say that? It's not necessary to say that. This is our state, the Jewish state. In recent years, there have been some who have attempted to put this in doubt, to undercut the core of our being. Today we made it law. This is our nation, our language and flag. See, now everybody else should do that. And they should invite Benjamin Netanyahu to the ceremony so that he can endorse and encourage, the Swedish people, declaring Sweden as a Swedish state of Swedish people. And if you're not Swedish, then you're a visitor, or you have to live with the understanding that it's a Swedish nation and it doesn't belong to other people. And Benjamin Netanyahu should be there on stage to help promote and inaugurate that for all the different various European nations. The new law sparked an outcry from civil rights organizations and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so then we get into all the blah, blah, blah about people that don't like it. And I'm not interested in hearing from people that don't like it, because it's the right thing to do. I mean, are you, is the alt-right going to tell us that we really should be adopting George Soros's open nation policy? So don't complain about Israel having an Israeli identity. Just do it yourself. Do the same thing yourselves. If you can't do it, then what does that say about yourself? I mean, look. I'm an American living in America, and I'm a Christian, and the only thing I can do is talk about secession and starting a separate Christian nation. But I'm willing to do that. Now there are a lot of nationalists in Europe and the various countries, and they should be taking this article and that Jewish law, and they should be celebrating it, and they should be using that as their platform for why they should have a nation state also. They should say, look, this is wonderful. Look what Israel's doing. We need to do the same thing. And that's the way I think that's the way to proceed. So that's my Christmas gift to the world. 2018 is bringing this very interesting phenomena over there to light. This is hard, I think, for a lot of Christians to embrace, because I think a lot of Christians have been co-opted into thinking that this principle that in Christ there are no Jew, Greek, male, female, free or slave, is supposed to be applied to the world at large. And it's not, it's just for Christians. And so I think as Christians, if we see somebody trying to do that, adopt those principles in a secular society like George Soros in his Open Society, we should oppose that. Because he's rebuilding Babylon. He's not this has nothing to do with Christianity. In fact, it's an anti-Christian phenomena, because basically using these principles of equality to promote their satanic religion, and to force everybody under that. I think that in the past, Christians valued more a nation that put Christ on the throne than they do now. Now that they're if you want Christ on the throne, you gotta be very specific about it, like the Jews are about making a Jewish nation. And a lot of Muslims are like that about their nations. They want them to be Islamic theocracies. I don't believe in it. I believe Islam's a false religion and so forth. But at least they have at least they respect and worship their God enough to let them rule their lands. So that's not something I could say for many Western nations at this point. Now, interesting thing that the Hungarians and the Polish are following this idea of having, nation-state law. That the Hungary's for Hungarians, and they're a Christian nation. Poles are saying pretty much the same thing about themselves. They have the right to do that. It's biblical. It's Christian, and it's makes an awful lot of sense in terms of protecting your people. Just like, okay, most people, even people who believe in open society, and even Christians who, think that, it would be wrong to exclude other people into your country, they lock their door at night. And they exclude people from coming into their house. And then the same thing. See, does that mean they hate their neighbors? I mean, if you say trying to keep people out of your country is an act of hate, then keeping people out of your house at night is also an act of hate. So you should not be allowed to lock your doors, and you should let everybody into your house. And if you don't like that idea, then you should understand that it also applies to nations. And that's the way to divide this material. Okay, so there we go. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and maybe 2019 will, I don't know, be better in terms of people speaking their minds and their identity and their preferences for societies and so forth. And we won't be kicked around and pushed around by people who seeking to destroy us. So, we'll see what happens. There's the prophecies that are involved in this. There's an awful lot of prophetic things going there, in Israel. I think that there will be a movement to expel Jews from different various nations, because when people find out, for instance, that they're behind open societies, that the destruction of Europe through immigration, they're facilitating that they facilitated World War I, World War II, 9/11. Then people are going to say, this is not safe for us to have these people controlling our government, and they will have a place to go called Israel. And by the way, I'm not, my idea would be, okay, if you're Jewish and you understand that you're living in a nation that's of other people, and they have the right to rule themselves, and they don't want Jews in their government and so forth. I mean, you want to live there, that's fine, but just, you live there under the understanding that you're not living in a nation that's open to being influenced by Jewish practices, and so that would be fine. I mean, this could all be done non-violently and should all be done non-violently. And then what will happen is, unfortunately, I think that the people who like the alt-right crowd. I mean, that's one of the things about Red Ice that kind of scares me. I think that if they got their way too much, they would go too far and try to kill all the Israelis. I for some reason I got that feeling that they're not satisfied with just kicking the Israelis out and letting them live in Israel, but then they want to destroy Israel too. I think that's part of what's going to happen prophetically. I think that's what the Bible speaks of, that's going to happen. And then this will be a catalyst. This will be the impetus to sort of put Jews in between a rock and hard place. And somehow this is going to bring about not only Israel as a nation state calling themselves a nation state for the Jews, but they will now become a nation state that believes that Jesus is the Messiah. This is going to happen when the world, I think, is turned on them. I mean, as this information becomes more and more available, and people know who's behind what and what kind of evil they've been doing, it's hard it's hard to exercise restraint and have guilt by association, and avoid guilt by association and so forth. But even the Bible, often God in the Bible often practices guilt by association, and in the fact that He will judge a whole nation, even if there's righteous people living there, because they're part of that nation, they also will endure that national punishment. That's always been, part of the biblical paradigm, and that's just the way God created the universe. So what's going to happen? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure that what I just said will happen eventually, but how we're going to get there, I'm not sure. I mean, I would, my idea of having sort of a Christian nation, secede from the United States, a bunch of them, because there's all kinds of Christians in each. I'm not really anti-denominational that much. People, I mean, I understand that if Christians would practice sort of agreement on the main things and liberty on the things that aren't that important, I mean, you could have a unified church, but denominationalism enables people to accommodate a variety of expressions, and so my idea of a Christian, even a non-denominational Christian nation or whatever. I mean, if you're not a Christian, you want to live there, that's fine. Just you gotta, with the understanding you're living in a non-Christian nation. I mean, you're living in a Christian nation, and as a non-Christian, you don't have a voice in the government, just like Christians in the United States don't have a voice in the government, because you can't, your Christian values are not allowed to address lawmaking. And so that would be the same kind of thing. So let's say you're a Jew or a Muslim or something, and you want to live in this Christian nation. Well, you do so with the understanding that that's what you're doing. You're living in a Christian nation. The government's not open to your values, your beliefs, and that's the way it should be. And yeah, so that's that's thinking ahead. You got to think these things through first. Well, you don't want to agree to something that's going to eventually destroy you, like the early American Christians did. And now you see what kind of nation we're living in. It's becoming increasing like Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's also becoming like where you can't. You're afraid to say. You're afraid to talk. There's so many things you can't say because the religion, you're going to offend the religion of humanism, and there's blasphemy laws in America that if you blaspheme humanism, if you then you can lose your job and so forth. Now they don't say it like that, but that's what's happening in effect. That's exactly what's happening. And so, what the American government should do is make a statement like the Israelis did, a nation state, say, okay, this is officially, we're a humanist nation, and, if you're not a humanist and you want to stay here, you do so under the understanding that you don't have the same, freedom to influence the government that the humanists do. And so if you want to be part of lawmaking and so forth, you have to become a humanist. Now that would be much more honest. That's how the United States, because that's what's really happening in the United States. That's the truth of the United States. That was the founding fathers' intentions. And that's what we see happening. Now they didn't articulate it that way because they knew that if they did, Christians wouldn't go along with it, and they need Christians to pay the bills. And so you tell them something like they got freedom of religion, for instance, and by the way, the religion can't address lawmaking, and so it's a meaningless type of freedom of religion. As far as the nation's concerned, that's what America. If America was honest, so you're living in a free humanist nation, and we have humanist blasphemy laws, and there's certain words you can't say, and if you say them, there are certain things you can't say. You're blaspheming the humanist religion, and you'll be punished. That's really the honest truth about the United States, and that's what they should do. They should be honest. And if they're going to deny that and say there's really something, then we should secede and say, okay, we'll start our own nation because we're, whatever you guys are doing, we're not part of. And if they don't deny it, if they come out and say that, the right thing for them to do is to give people the right then to choose to secede or not. And this is really what the government should be doing now. Right now, if the federal government, the president, whatever goes on there in Capitol Hill, this is what they should be discussing. How are we going to go back to the drawing board and allow people to split up the United States in such a way that they get what they want? That's what the government should be doing with our tax money. That's what they should be doing, not what all the other nonsense they're doing. And they should be, overseeing this deconstruction and allowing people to reconstruct their own, self-governance. To me, that would be, then I would be patriotic because then I would say, oh well, they're actually doing something that really, is means real freedom. But until then, I don't believe. I'm not a humanist, and I'm not. There's nothing. I can't be patriotic in a humanist nation. I'm not part of it. You have to be, in order to be part of something, you have to believe in it. And you see what I'm talking about here. And then this, by the way, this is all talk. I have no intention of doing anything in terms of, starting a revolutionary army or anything like that. It's just that, if you convince enough people, if enough people hear what you're saying and they agree with it, and then just the sheer momentum of popular beliefs could make this happen peacefully. And they could, that would be I wouldn't be the only one talking about it. Everybody would be saying, okay, here's what you need to do. Here's what the federal government needs to be busy about, dismantling this and preparing for these new nation states to arise that are based on, different various popular choice. So that if there's, enough Americans who want, X type of nation, and they can, grab a few states, and they can, they wouldn't be grabbing them. I mean, they've been given a few states, and they could, or whatever, they could have those kinds of nations there. So other people might be, white nationalists, or, Christian, or even you could even have. Michigan could become a Muslim nation. And that's really, if we were pursuing freedom, in government, that's the direction we would be going. But that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. But I think anybody reasonable-minded person who's able to think original thoughts, consider what I'm saying and say, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, people should be free to establish their own nations if they want. If they see, okay, this is not what I want, and this is what I do want, and that's why I don't have a problem with the left and right. The only problem I have with left and right is the fact that they're trying to live together. That's the problem. They should have split up a long time ago. I mean, at the very minimum, there should be a left and a right nation. There should be two different nations, two totally different sovereign nations that don't have to answer to one another. I mean, if they wanted to trade, if they wanted to have travel in between and have visitors and tourists, and if they wanted to, do trade and industry together, whatever, that's fine. But as far as, being left and right, they need two different nations to accommodate those things. And there's the people that always say, oh, you got to get into the middle. Well, here's the middle is going right to globalism. There is no such thing as a middle. There's not, the middle is just the thing that's heading towards globalism. It just means, don't pursue what you want. Just do what we want. And it really, actually, the neocons and the liberal left and so are really sort of going in the same direction. I mean, mainly, I mean, if you're communistic, or if you're humanistic, or if you're atheistic, then that's the middle of where America is going. So the middle could really be described as, I think, communist, or neo-Bolshevik. That's the middle of American politics. That's a neo-Bolshevik thing. So, I mean, if you like freedom, I mean, that's the way to go. You should say, okay, here's what I would like to see. This is what I want. This is what you want. They're incompatible. Let's separate. That's adult, loving Christian thing to do. If you're any of those things, I don't know. It's not the humanist thing. The humanist thing to do is to force everybody to adopt your values however you can, and don't allow anybody to secede or break off or anything. All right, I'm going to stop. Take care.